Christo, Shahul, Gracie, and my young friends. It's a great pleasure to be here this evening to share some ideas and hopefully learn with all of you. Before I share some of my ideas of business, let me sketch an overall background of the Indian economy. Don't believe everything that you hear about how difficult things are going to be. Well, my friends, things have always been critically difficult in our country, ever since you and I were born. That's bound to be so, because we are a country of something like 1.2 billion people, competing like crazy for everything, starting from gas cylinders to school admissions to everything, even water. So competition is hard. Competition is part of our DNA. For everything we compete, right from cradle to grave. I'm told that you even have to compete to reserve a grave in the cemetery. Even after you die, there's no respite for competition. So things have always been very challenging in our country for all of us. So how is it going to be any more difficult than what we are already used to? So how are things going to be more difficult in the next 12 months than we have already been used to? We have faced everything, you name it, from floods to drought to power cuts to strikes to violence to this, to that, and to everything else we have faced. So I don't believe we should be worried over much about what the economists say over the next 12 or 18 months. But having said that, the Indian economy is a $1.4 trillion economy. When I was studying economics, the rate of growth used to be defined as the Hindu rate of growth, which was 3%. Traditionally, 30 years ago, India only grew at 3% or less, and that's why they called it the Hindu rate of growth. Foreign exchange was conspicuous by its absence. When I went to study in the US, I still remember the dollar exchange rate was 7 rupees. And in order to get the exchange, foreign exchange, I had to stand literally upside down to get a foreign exchange permit. We had no infrastructure. We had no telephones. We had hardly any electricity worth the name. Nothing happened except the spirit of the people was very much. And today, the economy is growing at about 6%, 5.3% says the IMF. Government of India says 5.6, 5.7. But somewhere in the area of between 5 and 5.5% is what the growth was in the last year. And in the coming year, it will be thereabouts. Over the last 8 or 10 years, we have grown consistently between 7 and 9%. The number of people who have been lifted out of poverty has fallen from around 40% to around 26% today in the last 10 to 15 years. Foreign exchange, which was so scarce, is a success story. We have approximately $292 odd billion in terms of reserves, of which around $260 billion are foreign currency assets. Dollars, actually, as opposed to financial instruments. Our inflation rate, the headline inflation rate is about 7%. Food inflation is about 20%. We have a trade deficit of $185 billion. The lion's share of that trade deficit is accounted by just 2 items. One item with which you institute are very familiar, namely gold imports, and the other is oil. Our foreign trade portfolio has changed very dramatically in the last 10, 12 years. There was a time when the United States accounted for some 22% of our foreign trade. Today, the United States, believe it or not, accounts for just about 12% of our foreign trade. Europe used to account for a large chunk of our foreign trade. Today, Europe's share in our foreign trade has also declined very substantially. The share of Asia in our foreign trade went up from 38% about 10 years ago to about 50-52% today. So we have done well, my friends. We have done exceedingly well. We have done extremely well, despite the government. The government, according to me, has done everything in its power to make sure that the Indian population is shackled hand and foot. If you ask me what is the worst influence in this economy, I won't say it is drought, which is supposed to be hitting us this year. I won't say it's the meltdown in Greece and Europe or the recession in the US. I'll say it's the government of India. This is the biggest problem in our country. It's the government. Why do I say that? Look at the example, look at the track record of governance. Last March, I was invited to give a plenary address at the South Asia Literacy Conference of Rotary in Kathmandu. So I had in the audience about 500 people from all over South Asia, including some ministers from Pakistan, the Chief Secretary of Bhutan, and the Nepalese parliamentarian, and so on and so forth. I said in my opening line, I said, isn't it very ironic that some 60 years after you and I have achieved our independence, we are still talking about an illiteracy rate of 40%. Virtually 60% of our population cannot read and write. What kind of a governance track record is that? After 60 years, you are telling me that still 60% of our people only can read and write. Now, isn't that a failure of governance? And you know, it's a very important economic truth that the literacy rate has important pass-through connections to malnutrition. You will be shocked to know that over 40% of children under the age of 5, even in this country today, are malnourished. And one of the primary reasons for that is literacy, low literacy rates. I said the Indian economy is something like $1.4 trillion. My estimate is that about 50% of that economy is under the surface. So that puts it between $500 to $700 billion is the black economy. And don't forget that trillions of dollars stashed away in Swiss banks and other banks which are not part of this black economy in this country. Those of you who are in the jewelry business know that people buy gold in vast quantities in this country. We know that huge amounts of gold have been imported, and that's why our trade deficit is high. And what do people do with the gold? And what is the source of income for buying gold? Where is the gold held? It's held in private lockers, isn't it? Most of it is black. Because people are afraid of the future, and gold is the traditional safe haven to tide against an uncertain future. That's why gold has traditionally been the asset of choice in India. And India has the world's largest private stock of gold and silver. And that's directly correlated to the level of danger, risk and uncertainty in our country. So if there's high risk, there's high gold sales. And gold, traditionally, economists will tell you, the price of gold has traditionally mimicked the rate of inflation. So gold is considered to be the ultimate hedge against inflation. So what I'm trying to say is, huge amounts of cash, gold and property are all part of this underground economy. So who says there's no money in this country? I'd like to know. I don't believe there's any shortage of cash or resources in this country. We have plenty of it. Plenty of it. How rich we were even 500 years ago. That's why the East India Company and the Dutch and the Portuguese and everybody else came here to trade and pillage and plunder and rape and take the wealth away from this country. Those of you who are following the Padmanabha Swami temple know the kind of treasure that's there in the temple. My estimate is about $50 billion, not counting for antiquity. And this treasure has been accumulated over 1,000 years. So imagine the wealth that's there in our country. So I don't believe the Indian economy is a basket case. I think the US economy is a basket case, but the US is structurally so strong that they'll come back. The real basket case is Europe. In today's newspaper, you would have read a news item that even Germany's AAA rating is likely to be removed. The sovereign rating of Germany, which is AAA, is likely to be cut because the German economy is also beginning to feel the core recession that is stalking Europe. So the real basket case is Europe, not India. And India today still is the primary destination of choice for foreign investment other than China, which of course has its own uncertainties. But India still raked in about $30 to $35 billion in FDI, foreign direct investment, last year. And let's face it, this 1.2 billion population is one of the world's largest, most dynamic markets. I was quite fascinated to read that Infosys and Wipro are posting less than satisfactory first quarter earnings. The first quarter of this year. There's no surprise in that because they are looking at Europe and America and the rest of the world. And that is the reason why their earnings have taken a dip this year. And they are likely to dip even further. The reason I'm saying is that the world's most under-tapped IT market is India. This is where the greatest potential for IT business resides today. I've held this belief for quite some time. It's here that the real action is happening. All said and done, our use of IT is very entry level. So that's a virgin market actually for IT in India. And anybody who realizes that and scales up accordingly will make huge amounts of money in India. So I am very, very excited about business prospects in India. Even though everybody says there are going to be tough times. Tough times go with business. Tough times and business, there is a natural connection because it's a competitive environment. But that's where the opportunities for profit and growth also are maximum. You know this old concept of risk return. The higher the risk, the higher the return. That applies very strongly in India. So I'd like to start off with making that great stress on India's prospects. I think we would be the economy that can drive the rest of the world. But for that, you and I have to grow. And we've got to forget about government. The real problem facing India today is not the fiscal deficit or the trade deficit. It's the governance deficit. And it's the leadership deficit. And it's that leadership deficit that I'm really concerned about, which is why I'm here today. Thrissur asked me this very interesting question before we came into this room. He asked, can this one person make a difference? The leader or the CEO or the business owner? And my answer was an emphatic yes. One of mankind's greatest thinkers was Peter Drucker. Some of you may have heard of Peter Drucker. He once made a very famous statement. He said an organization is the shadow of the leader. An organization is a shadow of the leader. Kautilya said that 2300 years ago. He said, Yatha Raja, Tatha Praja.